Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's webinar. So we are focusing on cloud-first identity, and we've got some new features to discuss that have come to Entra, some recently released and some hot off the press. So this should be quite an interesting one to get through. So on the agenda for today, just going to do a brief history of users and groups, so where things have been until now. And then we will get through the latest and greatest in group management. So there is now the source of authority conversion. We'll talk about that, group write back and how that relates and the scenarios that enables and some of the caveats that apply if you are looking at these features. And then we have some user management updates, and this is where it's the hot off the press piece. So that should be interesting. And then we've got some other updates related to Entra in general, so around private access and other parts of Entra and Entra ID governance. Finally, we're just going to talk briefly about licensing. It's ever a joke that Microsoft licensing is hard to understand. So we've had numerous questions around internally and externally, from yourselves, exactly how licensing around the Entra suite and ID governance features work. So we just wanted to try and wrap up with that to help you on that topic. And finally, we'll do the Q&A at the end. Okay, so users and groups. Clearly, we all know this system, Active Directory. That's been around a long time. Many of us will still be using it. Probably looks a little bit more modern than this screenshot, but the practicalities of it haven't changed. So we've long been creating users and groups in AD, obviously originally for on-premises reasons, authentication, linking to other systems. So many years ago now, about 10 in fact or more, Azure Active Directory came along, of course. That in itself was a cloud identity provider where you could create users and groups directly, but where typically we had Azure AD Connect, of course, syncing users and groups from on-prem to cloud. And so that may not always be the case. Some could be AD only, some could be cloud only. But ultimately, if you wanted hybrid users and groups, they needed to be sourced from Active Directory. Later, of course, that becomes Entra ID, and the Azure AD Connect becomes Entra Connect, but in essence, nothing has really changed fundamentally in the last 10 years or so. So users and groups were created in Active Directory if they're hybrid anyway, but of course, you could be managing these users and groups from another service like MIM or third-party tooling, but regardless, the hybrid scenario stays the same. Just a quick side note, of course, as I say, you may be managing users separately with MIM or directly with Entra provisioning or with another service, even a third-party service, which is when you would source your users from a authoritative directory like a HR system, perhaps transform that data, but ultimately provision those typically into AD via the on-premises agent and sync them up to Entra with Entra Connect originally, and more recently, perhaps Entra Cloud Sync. But again, the problem was still the same. You had hybrid users or AD-only users and cloud-only users. So there was no such thing as, cloud first or Entra first going back to AD. In recent years, we've seen group provision to AD come along. So that was originally called group write back under Entra Connect. So that is where groups could, of course, be created in Entra and written back to AD. And originally they didn't have, very good identifiers in AD. That has improved. And more recently, it's changed to group provision to Active Directory, and that's only available under Entra Cloud Sync. So again, that capability is much the same. They would be created and managed in Entra under group write back, under Connect. You could do M365 groups as well. Under group provision to AD, this is security groups only. But they could be created and managed in Entra ID, and then written back to AD as universal groups only. So some recent releases around group management. So these features have been around for a month or two now. So the first one is group source of authority conversion. So what this means is those existing groups we have in Active Directory that are sourced in Active Directory and synced to Entra can have the source of authority flipped, more or less. So that's using a new attribute that's available in Entra called is cloud managed. So at the moment, that's only available via API. So you can do this via script, via Graph Explorer, etc. But essentially, all we need to do is change the is cloud managed flag to true, and all of a sudden, the source of authority becomes Entra. So that now means without making any changes to the group itself, we can flip that source of authority. Existing systems don't notice any difference. Everything stays the same. And so if we wanted to stop using that group in AD, we could simply just remove it and keep managing it in Entra. But of course, often what is the case, especially in many organizations that have been around for a while, is that we do have a hybrid environment in the medium term, at least, to manage, but we want to manage those groups from Entra instead of AD. So group provisioning, of course, was already there. But what's different here is that we can actually convert your existing AD groups, maintain the SID, maintain everything, can change the source of authority to Entra, and then write that back to the existing object in Active Directory without affecting any downstream applications, any of the attributes. So you literally don't need to reinvent anything or reassign anything in AD. We can manage that group and its membership from Entra, and the applications and systems on premises won't know any different. We can convert mail objects, by the way, but they won't be manageable in Entra. They will become Exchange objects. So they need to be managed from Exchange, and they won't support write back. But typically, in the scenario that most organizations are in now, where at least the mailboxes are cloud only and Exchange online, that shouldn't create too many issues. And of course, this is API based, graph based. There is a script available to actually do this in bulk. So if you've done an audit on your groups, we can in bulk change the source of authority of a list of groups in AD. So what does this enable so far? So AD group cleanup, of course. So if, as I mentioned just now, if you are removing groups, minimizing AD use, we can simply just convert the SOA, delete the group in AD. Perhaps it's not needed anymore, because in some scenarios, although the group was managed in Active Directory and synced to Entra, it was actually perhaps for a SaaS application or for another cloud service or a Microsoft service. The fact that it was managed in AD was just because of the way that's how organizations did things, or maybe another service was managing the actual group membership in AD. So in that scenario, you can simply change the source of authority and remove it from AD. Equally, I mean, some on-premises applications are using modern authentication. So if you have perhaps a web app on-prem that is using Entra claims, so SAML or OpenID Connect, for example, we could also delete that group in AD as well, because actually it doesn't need that information. It's just looking at Entra and the group information that's there. So for group cleanup, that's the first thing. On the other hand, if we do have on-premises apps that need the actual Active Directory group, be it for Kerberos or be it being tied to another attribute that's in Active Directory, this is where we can simply change the source of authority and start to govern it from Entra instead. And as I say, that's without changing the actual applications themselves, because the group in AD doesn't change at all. It's just where it's managed from. We can also write back our Entra dynamic groups, so criteria-based groups. So if we were using another service again, like MIM or something else, Netrix is another one that's often used to populate dynamic membership, criteria-based membership in Active Directory. We can now, we could with group write back, but again, without changing the AD group, we can now manage that criteria in Entra and populate that on-prem. The other great thing is, of course, these are now all of a sudden Entra groups sourced in Entra. That means we can make the most of things like access packages, so we can do self-service with approvals to on-prem groups. We, of course, can tie in things like verified ID and face check, so you could even have face check applied to a sensitive on-prem group, or perhaps a privileged role that's tied to a group in Active Directory. Even in some such circumstances where we're starting to use My Access more and more, we're often using access packages as a way to do just-in-time privileges on-prem, and of course this means we could even have face check in front of a domain admin request. Similarly, access reviews, so we could always review AD groups in Entra already with access reviews, but we couldn't make any remediations because, of course, Entra had no authority over the group membership. That, of course, will change with this, so we can actually do reviews and remediations based on that review, similar or in the same way as we would have done it with an Entra group anyway. but again, changing the membership of the on-premises group inherently. There are some caveats. So first of all, only the latest versions of Connect Sync and Cloud Sync will recognize this is managed group flag. What that essentially means is it will Entra Connect and Cloud Sync, once that flag has changed, it's set to true, they will know to no longer sync the group membership from AD and only to manage it the other way if Cloud Sync's been configured, which I'll get to in a second. So that's important. If you're only changing the source of authority and you're not writing back, in theory, you wouldn't need to worry about this, but the best practice will be to have the latest version of Connect and Cloud Sync. Of course, I mentioned this already, group provision to AD, aka write back, and that's only in Cloud Sync. So although you might use Connect Sync to change the source of authority, and again, in the scenario where you're doing AD minimization, cleaning up the groups in AD, you don't actually need Cloud Sync. Connect Sync will recognize that flag as well. But of course, you can't do write back of that group because that's a Cloud Sync feature. The other piece is, as before with group provision, but just a reminder, these can be written back as universal groups only. And similarly, if you're changing the source of authority of a group to Entra, it will need to be converted to universal before as well. So if you have domain, local, and global groups, they will need converting in Active Directory, then change the source of authority, and then write them back if needed. That write back, though, is tied to the SID. Now, the Cloud Sync write back configuration is based on OU. And so basically, before you start writing back the group that you changed the source of authority with, you will need to make sure that it's in scope of Cloud Sync write back. So basically, if that existing group is seen by Cloud Sync, it will just match them up and jobs are good and not much will really change. It will just keep updating the membership source from Entra. But if for some reason that group's been deleted or can't be found or is out of scope of the Cloud Sync write back, then it will simply create a new group because it can't find a matching SID. So that's important. But yeah, you could start with changing the source of authority without write back and then look at write back later, or equally make sure any OUs that you're looking at with write back are in scope of Cloud Sync before doing the SOA and then the write back. So again, this isn't a particularly new thing, but if you are doing criteria-based membership from MIM or Networks or somewhere else, not only will you need to change the source of authority, you'll also need to convert it to a dynamic group and then update the criteria. So there's an extra step there. So you will be, or two extra steps potentially. You'll need to capture the criteria that's being used to populate that group in AD. Of course, it's possible that not all scenarios are supported in Entra either, because there may be different criteria available compared to what you're using already. But capture that criteria, we'll need to convert the source of authority to Entra. We'll then need to convert that Entra group to a dynamic group, and of course, add the criteria that we had previously. So there's a few extra steps there, but it can be done, again, without upsetting the original AD group that is on premises. Couple more to go through. So if your groups are nested in AD, you'll need to change the source of authority for each of those groups. It doesn't cascade through the groups, so that's one thing to remember. I mentioned this already, but just to go over it again, so mail-enabled security groups and distribution lists, so anything mail basically in AD can be converted and change the source of authority to the cloud in this case. But it won't be managed in Entra. Like with all groups, it can only be managed in Exchange Online. So you would either want to manage them via Exchange or Exchange PowerShell, or sorry, Exchange Online or Exchange PowerShell, or you could also change them to an M365 group. But either way, there's no write back available for those ones. Okay, so then it's user management. So here there is a nice change going through today. So this wasn't available when I just checked just now, but this is due to go out today. We may not see any public information until Monday, but the deployment should be available shortly. So source of authority for user conversion, this is what's coming. So we've just told the group story, although the order of events is different here. So we don't have we don't have user write back at the moment. That came first with groups, of course, but you can see where this is going. Already this does enable some scenarios, but I'll go through that in a second. But ultimately, we can now change the source of authority of an AD user, a hybrid user that's synced from Connect or Cloud Sync to Entra from AD can have the source of authority changed. So that means we can now govern those users in Entra without affecting that user account at all. We don't need to recreate anything. So anything they're doing in the cloud or with modern apps won't be affected. They will have the password they had from AD. The object in Entra is exactly the same. They can carry on working, no impact whatsoever. But of course, we can only change the source of authority at the moment. So this is really in a cleanup situation or an AD minimization situation, which I'll get to in a second. Similarly to groups, this can be scripted. So after testing this a bit, we could do it in bulk and apply this operation to more users. So as I say, that's going live today-ish. So keep an eye out for that and for the public announcement, which should come on Monday. So this does enable some scenarios, not as many as groups just yet, but AD minimization. So if you have users who are generally cloud first, they don't need the AD object anymore, then we can change the SOA and they can carry on, as I say, without any issues, just there's no write back available. But that's only if, of course, they don't need LDAP, Kerberos, file shares, things like that. Similarly to the groups, though, if the application, if it's an Entra or a cloud app, of course, or a SaaS app, then you don't need to worry. But if it's an Active Directory application or on-premises application that's using Modern North, again, like a web application using claims from Entra, for example, again, you could still delete that user in AD because that user object isn't actually needed for that authentication piece. It's the web service will be contacting Entra to get that information when the user authenticates. So if it's integrated with Entra for authentication, may not be groups involved in this case, of course, but as long as authentication is happening in Entra, then again, the AD user could be removed, their source of authority could be changed, and they could become a cloud native user. So similar caveats to groups. So you will need the latest versions of Connect Sync and Cloud Sync to manage to recognize the is cloud managed group flag. Password hash sync must be enabled. So of course, if you're using pass-through authentication, you'll need to change that or add password hash sync first. And we do need that password to be available in Entra before we can change the source of authority, because of course otherwise they won't be able to authenticate. There's no write back, no provisioning functionality yet, but watch this space. And as I say, follow the group story and we can see where this is going. The other piece I wanted to highlight, and this is a diagram we had earlier in the deck. So of course, if we're doing provisioning, and this is in this scenario is coming from Workday SuccessFactors or via inbound provisioning to the Entra provisioning service, we're going to have to tread carefully, of course, because if today you're provisioning your users as hybrid into Active Directory and you change that source of authority to Entra, well, the provisioning service isn't going to know about that. It's going to keep trying to provision that user in AD. If they are no longer sourced there, then you're going to have some issues and some conflicts going on. Potentially even if you delete the account in AD, it's going to get recreated, of course. So some things to watch there. What you're going to need to do is carefully scope who gets to become a cloud-only user. So, as you are staging users over or testing users, piloting users in a small group to begin with, you would need to time when they are filtered out of the on-premises provisioning app and filtered into potentially a new provisioning app. You might not have cloud-only provisioning set up as it stands. So you would need to bear that in mind. So they'll need to be filtered out of the on-premises provisioning, filtered into the cloud Entra provisioning service. And you might need to do that with a new attribute. It depends if you can define them in a certain way. Again, start with test users, start with something that we can recognize easily. As you start to widen the scope and widen this out, potentially you could do something more, departmental to change that filtering scope and obviously move people over out of hours, for example. But in any case, just bear that in mind. You are going to run into problems if you haven't considered this before changing the source of authority for a user who's sourced externally. Again, be that MIM, be that anything else, the same will apply. Okay, so hopefully that was interesting. So lots of changes on the user and group side of things, as you can see, and the general direction of travel is quite clear now, I believe. So I will get to some questions towards the end. For now, I will carry on with the latest Entra updates. So there are some new feature releases across the Entra stack, including ID governance. First of all, I wanted to give it its own slide. This is a really nice one. So private access for domain controllers. There is a new sensor available now that you can install on your DCs. And that essentially allows us to intercept Kerberos traffic and apply conditional access. So the service will stop the traffic going directly to the DC and instead route the authentication traffic to Entra whilst keeping the actual application traffic on-prem. So what that means is, even without integrating a legacy app with private access, we can start to intercept all Kerberos authentication. So be it a file share, be it something else on-prem, any Kerberos traffic for that user in scope, who of course has the agent installed, will be able to have that authentication traffic routed via conditional access, and therefore we can enable authentication strengths for legacy apps and passkeys, everything else you can do in conditional access, whatever policies you like, to actually enable or allow the authentication to go ahead. You could of course block traffic in a similar way as well if you'd rather do that for some users. But it's a really, really good thing that's coming and should enable more scenarios with less work to your legacy applications. So another one, so app management policies, or application policies, they are called in some places, but essentially there has long been a bit of contention in some organizations between developers and IT administrators. Developers, of course, want to be able to create their own applications in Entra, manage them, test things out, and often in organizations there's a bit of reluctance to do that because they may not always follow best practices. Things may not get tidied up accordingly. So we can now set some policies at a global level. So applications and service principals, we can restrict to in a variety of ways. So we can block new secrets being added. We can configure the lifetime of secrets that's allowed, so people don't just add very, very short secrets to applications. We can configure trusted certs, so we can block untrusted certs, and we can configure the lifetimes of the keys of those certs as well. And we can also block insecure URIs and audiences. So again, you'll often see developers using things like localhost and test applications, which hopefully should be reserved for development environments. And therefore in production, we want to limit what URIs they can use. So it could be things for testing. It could be specific endpoints you just don't want to allow in your organization, and similar with audiences. So we can control all of that at a global level, and then let potentially developers and others run with this within the scope of what you've configured. So that's basically what I've said. So can enable that governance while allowing application owners to do things themselves. So some other Entra updates. So this is a fairly new one. So a couple of days ago, there was a blog post around this. So this is another interesting agent scenario that's come up. So far, there's been the conditional access optimization agent and various security copilot capabilities, but this is specifically for access reviews. It's looking pretty good. The other good thing is, and we've had this request from customers before, is they can actually manage the reviews via Teams. They can actually use natural language to ask about a particular user and their access, and the agent can do a lookup and present information back to that reviewer, and the reviewer can decide, from that information, whether to approve or deny the access. So again, could be quite useful for some organizations, especially where access reviews become quite time-consuming. So cross-cloud, cross-tenant sync is now GA. So cross-cloud is across sovereign cloud and public cloud, or 21 VNet in China, for example, or government cloud. So that's now gone GA. Entra Connect will shortly have a first-party application in Entra. So that means there'll be a managed application available in Entra that you can use for this that will be better governed and protected. And we can also, of course, as I spoke about last time, now use certificate authentication for Connect. So we're really tightening up the security around the provisioning service itself, where we are still needing to provision users from AD into Entra. So approvers can now delegate their approvers in My Access. That's in public preview. So at the moment, that's only for access package approvals. In November, I believe we will see delegation for access reviews themselves, but access package approvals is now there in public preview. We can now reprocess failed lifecycle workflows. So if you're using lifecycle workflows, you may have seen them fail and there's no easy way to reprocess them. So there's now a button available in the lifecycle workflows portal to simply reprocess a specifically failed workflow. This is another good one. So we can trigger lifecycle workflows on user inactivity. So again, previously we could do access reviews and look and see who is an inactive user, but we couldn't do a whole load with them. Guests we could govern, but there wasn't a whole load of functionality. But this now allows us to trigger a lifecycle workflow. So we could say, after 90 days of inactivity, just automatically disable that user, and that could be in AD, of course, as well, because lifecycle workflows does have leverage of Active Directory users' accounts now as well. So we can do a whole load of that, and anything else with lifecycle workflows, including extensibility with the logic app, could be triggered. So it could simply be notifying somebody or raising a service request on the back of that inactivity report. So it opens up a whole load of scenarios for inactive users, and perhaps critically for privileged users or other users like that. We might want to apply more stringent controls and just automatically block them if they're not being used. So that's looking really good. There is now more support for customizability in lifecycle workflow emails. At the moment, that is just for formatting essentially, but it does allow you to control the visibility of those emails a bit more. And finally on this screen, we can now use lifecycle workflows to set expiration for access packages. So generally in a leaver scenario, or perhaps in mover, we can decide how long it takes for access packages to expire. So rather than to strip them away, we can add a 7-day window, for example, just in case there's any reason to keep the access in place a bit longer. And there are some more updates. So there's an updated My Account portal being rolled out. So we'll start to see more capabilities, and that's the actual My Account service itself, but across the My portals, there's more capabilities coming. So do watch this space. Requesters can now view who their access package approvers are. So again, this was often a blocker in some cases. You could see the request was pending, but you couldn't see who the approvers assigned are. So that's now available. This one I covered previously, but just again, we can now determine approval requirements externally. So we may want to look up in another database. Could even be something like a certification database to see if they have the required justification to have a particular access package or other reasons. So that's there as well. And obviously, so support for group membership and ownerships and entitlement management. So this is eligibility. So this is a really nice way of governing your PIM groups, for example. So previously, of course, somebody would have to manually assign eligibility to a PIM group. Now we can use access packages not only to assign them to the group, but to assign them as eligible. So for that initial, PIM, of course, might be on a day-to-day basis or for a few hours at a time that you elevate your role. But before that, you may have an access package that allows someone to request eligibility to a role for 6 months and then use PIM or another access package to actually manage the just-in-time elevation to that particular group. But again, this just allows more governance around PIM and potentially other privileged scenarios as well. Platform SSO for Mac is now GA, so that's essentially like Windows Hello for Business on Mac. So that's a really good feature to start using if you have Macs in your environment. It can allow you to meet passkey authentication enforcement in conditional access, even though users on a Mac. QR code for frontline workers, typically that's now GA, and there is now improved detection quality for Entra ID protection. There's more and more signals coming in. So that should be more desirable for our security focused environments. So that's the updates. I mentioned that we wanted to talk about licensing. So this isn't anything new, but it's just to hopefully clear up some misunderstandings there are across the product suite. And as I say, it's complicated for people internally and customers as well. It's quite hard to get your head around at times. So I don't know how much clearer this will be, but Again, this is available on the Microsoft documentation as well, but I've put it in a slightly different format here to hopefully clear some things up. So I put here standard capabilities for Entra. So these are things that have been around for a while, typically were P1, P2, E3, E5. So that's our provisioning services in general. So that's app provisioning and HR provisioning is P1, and of course anything in P1 is available up through the other SKUs as well as far as Entra Suite. Similarly, with group provision to AD, dynamic groups, and conditional access, and application proxy, these are P1. They've always been P1, and they will stay P1, and therefore they're automatically available in the upper SKUs as well. The long-standing P2 capabilities, so access packages, access reviews, PIM, and ID protection, again, they've been available for a while under P2, and they will stay in P2. Just to highlight, you of course get these when you go for ID governance or Entra Suite as well. In fact, Entra Suite requires P1 or P2 before you can purchase that. But just to highlight that is included there as well. So what's really changed in recent years or the last couple of years is the advanced capabilities. So this is where things are not generally available in P1, P2. That said, some things like the things we've discussed today, source of authority change is not tied to a license, and group provisioning and anything else in the provisioning space should stay under P1, so that shouldn't change. But these sort of more advanced capabilities that are coming up are typically going into the ID governance SKU. So that's lifecycle workflows, also assigned access packages, which essentially can be used as advanced birthrights, advanced access reviews. So that's the machine learning capabilities, for example, and the integration with verified ID, face check, logic apps. These things are part of ID governance, and most of the the updates I just discussed now around ID governance, so some of the approval delegations, all of these types of things are typically going to fall into the ID governance SKU. But there's that list is ever expanding. So with that license, you are getting a growing list of capabilities as well. There's a link at the end of the deck which you can look at if you want to look at all the feature set. But just to highlight those differences here. And where Suite comes into play, so again, Suite covers all of ID governance because it's part of the Suite. But what you're getting under Suite is also Verified ID Premium, private access, and internet access. So private access and internet access, of course, are the global secure access ZTNA agent that's now available. So they are available standalone. They're also part of the Suite, but only the Suite. Verified ID Premium does get a bit complicated. So Verified ID itself is not licensed. You can use it for free. You can start issuing credentials to your users. It's very easy to set up. You can even start using face check without any licenses. It's just you'll pay per face check 25 cents per check. If you don't have any licenses, what you get with Entra Suite essentially is 8 face checks per user per month. And that means you're essentially getting $2 worth of face checks in that licensing cost as well. So you will get benefits with Suite, but you can start to use face check and Verified ID itself without that. And just for clarity again, so Entra Suite is this highlighted stack here. So it's private access, internet access, ID governance, ID protection, and the 8 face checks per month. ID protection, of course, is available under P2. So if you have E5 or P2 already and you go for Suite, you'll actually get a discount on that, which I'll get to in a second. Also to highlight, I've gone over this before as well, but Entra Permissions Management, the CloudKnox acquisition went into retirement yesterday, so it was no longer available for sale for the last 6 months, but it's no longer usable since yesterday. So Microsoft are partnering with Delinea if you're interested in similar capabilities. And then just finally on the pricing of Entra Suite, so we've just gone over all the functionality and capabilities that come with it. You get all of those individual SKUs as part of the Suite. The idea is basically that there's a saving of $10. Individually, those components would come to $22. If you get the Suite, you get it down to $12 as a list price. And in fact, it's less. It's more like $9 if you already have P2 or E5 because you have ID protection already. So if you're thinking about ID governance and you're thinking about something like private access, there's not much of a difference in between an individual SKU and getting the overall Suite. So something to consider as you start to move services, perhaps to Microsoft. There might be Zscaler, it might be third-party governance tools, but again, there's definitely a cost saving to be had here overall. So if you're interested in any of this, we're of course here to help. So if you're not exactly sure what you want to do yet or where you need to go, we do a fixed price discovery and road mapping workshop where we can pretty much cover all of the topics we've just discussed, so Entra-wide, and that would be a couple of days of discovery with you, where we will discuss and go over your existing environment and the possible solutions that are available in Entra today. What might work for you. We can discuss licensing and things as well. That's, works for you depending on what you have now, depending what what budget you have potentially for additional licensing. So all of that can be discussed, and then we will spend 3 days basically writing up a report, which we will share with you, which has all the information we've captured, suggestions, next steps, roadmaps, etc. So this is an easy way to get started with your identity project, or if you're not sure which parts of the your identity strategy to start with first, this is one way of doing it. So get in touch with your account manager, or if you're not a client already, then you can get in touch by email or using the phone number there. If this is too much for you, we do also do something called a vision call. So we can do a 1-hour sort of scoping call with you, where we can go through some options at a very high level and potentially leads into this engagement or a wider statement of work for a wider discovery piece around specific requirements. Okay. So there are a couple of questions here to go through. I hope that was interesting. Do keep sending questions if you have any more. There's a couple here anyway. If there's any questions after today, of course, you can always get in touch. We'd be happy to help with that. But the questions we have here so far, so from Patrick, he's asking, he's saying, I understand Group Source of Authority is currently in public preview. Do we have any indication of when this will be moving to general availability? Don't have a hard date on that. I believe it will happen this year, but that's not, I don't believe it's confirmed. So yeah, understandably, you may want to wait for that to be GA before doing this in bulk. It does seem to be working quite well under preview, but obviously there is always the caveat that there's limited support if you start doing this in production. So obviously you do need to watch that. But for an exact date, unfortunately, I don't know. But it shouldn't be too long. There's a big push at the moment, as you can see. Some of these capabilities were slow to get to the surface. That were due a while ago. There was a bit of delays due to internal security initiatives at Microsoft. There's now a big push to get some of these out there, and there's a good lineup of roadmap items coming out soon, all on this basis. There's a big push from Microsoft. They know that customers are looking for this, so it will come very soon, but I don't have a date, unfortunately. And from Adrian, should we be using ConnectSync or CloudSync in the future? In other words, will ConnectSync be deprecated in future? So there's no official indication that it will be. It's definitely the direction of travel. But at the moment, I mean, if you have hybrid devices, then you're going to need to keep Connect. There are other limitations with CloudSync, such as the amount of members a group can have, and some other things it's worth looking at before you go fully CloudSync. But certainly some of the new capabilities are clearly coming to CloudSync. So in some scenarios, if you are not a massive organization and you are cloud first with minimal AD interaction, your devices are already Entra joined, you could probably be CloudSync, but there's a number of reasons to keep Connect in the short term at least. So yeah, no official news on deprecation, but it's sort of, it's leaning in that direction, but I don't think Connect's going anywhere for now. There's still many organizations that have hybrid devices. Okay. There are no other questions at the moment that I can see. Just double check. That's it. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for attending today. Do feel free to reach out. We will share this deck with you next week, and there's some links here that you can get to when the deck is shared for some of the features we've discussed today. Monday, we should see the public information around user source of authority, and we will, we're here if you need us, so feel free to reach out, and we'll speak to you very soon.